Even though a dark night of the soul feels a lot like grief, there is something intangible that you lost, which is your identity. In this video, I'm going to unpack the key differences between grief and dark night. I will explain the 5 stages of a dark night of the soul. So by the end of the video, you will know exactly if you are going through a dark night of the soul or grief. You will also know what stage you are in and how you can navigate the stages more easily. So I've experienced both spiritual awakening and the loss of my dad. When you lose someone you love, you experience deep pain due to the loss. The person is no longer part of your life anymore. But when you experience a dark night of the soul, you lost your identity too. For example, if you lose your parents, you are no longer a child. If you lose your kids, you're no longer a parent. And even if you're going through a breakup or a divorce, you are losing your identity as a couple or a married person. In the dark night of the soul, the loss of identity is felt more strongly than the loss of the physical person or thing. It's more personal. There's a story your ego has created around the identity. So when you lose your identity, you also lose a huge chunk of the story, which can be very devastating for your ego. So for example, when I lost my dad a couple of years ago, I experienced grief, but I did not experience a dark night of the soul. That's because I don't have any identity attached to my dad. But in contrast, when I had my first dark night of the soul, my identity and self-esteem was attached to my job. So when I was jobless, I felt that I had no more identity. I was lost and in despair, but I was not grieving for my job loss. I was feeling the pain of having no identity. This brings me to the first stage of the dark night, the realization stage. I've been through 3 dark nights of the soul, and I noticed this pattern. I always felt a big transformation coming my way before it even happened. Unlike grief, where you only felt it when you lost someone or are losing someone, for the dark night of the soul, there's always some kind of realization that something big is going to change, something big is going to happen. Like in my first dark night, I thought that animation is my passion. Being an animator will make me happy. So I studied for 2.5 years and became an animator. But within 3 months, I realized that it wasn't what I wanted. I'm not even that interested in the animation medium. I'm more interested in the storytelling, the story behind the animation. So I realized I made a mistake. I'm going down the wrong path. Reality is not what I expected. I'm like, uh-oh, what am I supposed to do? What am I going to do next? So for the first stage, it's all about realization. Your ego is constantly looking out for threats that will endanger its narrative. So if you realize you make a mistake, your beliefs are no longer valid and you can't hold on to the same story anymore, your ego will be the first to know. You will have some kind of sense, like how I know that my goals I was chasing is what my ego wanted, but not what my authentic self truly wanted. The realization you have may not always be through a form of insight. Sometimes it can be from major events in life that forces you to realize that something is wrong. For example, your identity may be tied to work. You may believe that work is the most important thing in your life. But then when you have a chronic illness which stops you from working hard, you start to realize that you have put too much emphasis on your job and you have neglected your health. When you have a realization, you don't go straight into the dark night. Your ego will be like, no, this is not true. It will try every way possible to defend its position and to cover its flawed premise. Your ego is going to fill out this gap in the belief system with something similar to maintain the identity and the story it has created. For example, after I left as an animator, someone actually approached me about the possibility of joining his animation company for another position. He said I could be in the back end creating system for the company or the front end doing the sales and marketing. And I quickly jumped at this opportunity. There wasn't any contract, there wasn't a specific position assigned to me, and I didn't even do much research of the company. I just left my part-time job that I was doing at that time for this opportunity. And later I realized that this company was in heavy debt. I was so impulsive in my decision, which is so unlike me. That's because I was in such deep shame. I wanted to cover up the mistake of choosing the wrong career path with anything related to animation. Denial is the second stage of the dark night of the soul. Your ego realized that the narrative doesn't hold true, so you quickly find another thing, another person, or another job to fill up the gap in the story. It could be something like, if I do this, things will go back to normal. If I find another person, I will be loved. If I treat my partner better, I will be worthy of their love. And if I find another job, I will achieve the success and happiness that I dream of. We believe by trying harder or finding a replacement, things will be different. But it's just our ego deceiving us. Our ego is trying to find a replacement to continue their narrative. You actually already have this realization in stage 1. You're waking up, but your ego is trying to put you back to sleep again, back to an unconscious state to prevent you from waking up in stage 2. Because once you wake up, the ego narrative will no longer hold true and it will lose its power. If you keep denying the truth, not only will it prolong your dark night, but it will also hit you so much harder when you wake up. You will realize how much time and effort you have wasted denying the truth. Like in my case, I spent tens of thousands of dollars and 2.5 years studying animation. Of course, my ego will want to continue the narrative instead of accepting the truth. But there will come a point where your ego can no longer cover up its fraud premise anymore. Things will blow out in your face and you have to give up on the narrative that your ego has been building all these years. In my case, the person who promised me a job didn't hire me in the end. His company was too much in debt to hire me, and I was in this limbo. I left my part-time job at my ex-company, and I was too ashamed to go back. I didn't have a new job, and I didn't know what to do next. So I was forced to face this mistake that I've made, the mistake that I was denying for the past few months. And I knew I had to step away from the animation industry for good. Covering up with any other jobs in the animation industry will not work. The third stage is called the ego death. At this point, your egoic identity is broken. You cannot tell the same old story anymore. What you have thought would work didn't work, no matter how hard you try to cover it up with new options. You begin to question all your choices and decisions in the past. This is the point where you start to acknowledge your mistakes. It's a very painful stage of the process and it feels very much like grief. You may also experience emotions like intense sadness, depression, anger, anxiety, and confusion. But on top of that, you are also forced to confront all the lies you have been telling yourself. Maybe like me, your self-esteem is tied to your work, but during this stage of the dark night, you find that no one wants to hire you. You can no longer use work as a means to establish your worthiness. Or maybe your sense of worth comes from your relationship. But during this stage, you may find that anyone you date, they abandon you, they betray and hurt you. You can't find anyone to love you. This stage may be very awful, but it's also one of the best stages that can happen to you, because now the belief and narrative your ego is holding are shattered completely. When your ego dies, you finally get to experience your true spiritual self, and you start to realize your worthiness, the love you're seeking, is actually here within you, your higher self. How long stage 2 and stage 3 is going to be will depend on how long you take to decide to let go of your old identity. Letting go is instantaneous, but the ego is always like, no, let me try one more time. Your ego will never want to give up on the identity. You hold on to the identity as tight as possible and as long as possible because it's too afraid to experience its own death. But you need to let go of the ego to experience the goodness that's waiting for you. You need to let go of your identity as a caterpillar before you can be a butterfly. You cannot be both a caterpillar and a butterfly at the same time. However, before you become a butterfly, you first need to go into hiding. Like a caterpillar, you need to go into a cocoon to destroy yourself completely before you can reconstruct yourself. The reason why you need to hide yourself from others is because you are lost and confused. When you don't have an identity and you don't know who you are, and you won't know how to interact with other people. You are neither the caterpillar nor the butterfly. You are stuck in between. You are still digesting and disintegrating part of your body and yet to form a new identity. It will be difficult for you to explain this transformation to others. That's why you need to be alone and hide from others. And more importantly, without isolation, you cannot discover your true purpose. This is the fourth stage, which I call the hiding stage, or some will call the limbo stage. Sometimes this transition can cause a lot of hopelessness and despair because you can't see an end to it. You know what you don't want, but you don't know what you want or what you're becoming. So there could be a lot of fear, anxiety, and depression. Like in my example, I was so lost in my career direction. Whenever I thought of my future or wanted to get a new job, I got this panic attack. I would be writing my resume and I would be hyperventilating and I couldn't stop crying. I lost confidence because I had spent years studying something that I thought was what I wanted, but it turned out to be false. So I was worried that my next job is going to be the same. I was worried that I would make the same mistake. And with this kind of energy, I couldn't see a clear path ahead. And I felt so disconnected from the world and those around me. During this phase, there is a lot of purging old emotional wounds, old belief system, unhealthy relationship patterns and lifestyle. And when you are left with nothing, it's very common to end up in some kind of despair or existential crisis. Because your ego is like, why bother? Why find a new job? Nothing works anyway. Nothing is meaningful, nothing is fulfilling. Why find a new partner or friends? It will just end up the same. They're not going to give me the love and support that I desire. I'll still end up feeling lonely. When your ego dies, it now plays this game of I give up, I'm not going to do anything, just let me die. At this stage, even though you're starting to leave the ego perspective, you're not fully in touch with the spiritual perspective yet. You have not fully awakened yet. And when you're in a low vibration of despair and anxiety, it's difficult to see or hear the guidance from the universe. You can't hear your intuition pointing to you saying that, hey, come over here, do this. Your spirit has all the answers that you're looking for, but you're still too much in your emotional pain to discover these insights. People can stay here for a very long time without any purpose, feeling that their life is dull and meaningless. Even though we don't want to get stuck in an egoic identity or over-identify with one, we still need some kind of identity to operate in the physical world. You cannot just show up in the world with this disintegrated form of half the caterpillar and half the butterfly. The problem for most of us is we break ourselves open without knowing how to put ourselves back again. Without a clear identity, we're just like floating souls wandering in this world aimlessly. To ease this phase, you have to learn how to relax and surrender to the process. Instead of worrying too much about the future and then feeling hopeless, learn to trust the universe and be at least in a neutral state. Because when you are at peace and acceptance, this is where the inspiration can naturally flow into your awareness. The last stage is the rebirth stage. It's when you have reorganized yourself, you have a new identity, and you are ready to face the world again. You are ready to emerge from your cocoon now and be a butterfly. Congratulations! Your new identity can be derived by your own intuitive knowing or by following the universe guidance. You may also reach out to spiritual mentors, teachers, mediums, or even friends and family to help you get a clearer idea of what your purpose is. Like for me, my brother helped me to brainstorm what jobs I could do. He's very good at brainstorming for ideas, and he knows me well enough to give suggestions that I will resonate with. From his list of ideas, being a tutor, a teaching profession, resonate with me the most. At the same time, I also felt a calling from my spirit to write more books and blog posts to help others in their spiritual journey. So I have two new identities, a tutor and a writer. But this time round, the difference is, I told myself that I'm going to take my career identity lightly. I'm not going to let my career define me. How well my books perform doesn't determine how successful or worthy I am as a person. I'm just going to enjoy the process. But when you seek help from others, you have to be really careful. You want to check if what they say resonate with your soul or not. Teachers and mentors can help you see another perspective that you might miss otherwise, but ultimately you have the free will to choose whatever you want to be. If you just accept everything that a teacher tells you, you'll be just like your ego taking on whatever the society tells us what to do. Also, if the path doesn't truly resonate with your spirit, you'll find yourself back to the dark night of the soul very soon again. And you don't need a full picture to be out of the dark night. Sometimes it's so subtle that you don't realize that the end is just around the corner. If you're wondering if your dark night of the soul is coming to an end soon or not, watch this next video for the 5 signs.